Welcome to the Bowel Chronicles, where we dive deep into the world of bowel health. I'm your host, Nikki Kilpatrick, and on this podcast we have raw and candid conversations with individuals facing various bowel conditions and illnesses. Through personal stories and shared experiences, we illuminate resilience and courage in the face of adversity. Be reminded that each story is personal and unique. These conversations are not to be taken as medical advice or to replace guidance from a doctor or healthcare provider. Our aim is to inspire and empower through these amazing stories, amplifying voices often unheard. So join us as we embark on this journey together. Sit back, listen, and be inspired. Enjoy the episode. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bowel Chronicles. I'm your host, Nikki Kilpatrick, and today we are joined by Tom Richard. And Tom, you also have your own podcast. I am super excited for this chat today to team up and effectively collaborate with another podcast host. So, Tom, you are very welcome here today to chat to us and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So, for our audience and viewers today, I have never interviewed or had a chat with anyone with Hirschsprung's disease. And Tom, you have been diagnosed with Hirschsprung's disease from you were 3 weeks old, I think. And I guess maybe you should just tell us a little bit about what Hirschsprung's disease is and kind of how that then impacted you as a small child.
Definitely. And to your point there, when you said you'd never met anybody with Hirschsprung's disease, up until about 6 months ago, neither had I. So that was one of the reasons for starting the podcast. But me, sort of as myself. So I was born very happy, happy, healthy weight, nothing untoward. I was a bit slow to feed, but that happens to a lot of children. So nothing really to worry about until about two and a half to 3 weeks old, when I was quite drowsy, not feeding. Condition then sort of deteriorated quite rapidly. Um, so the doctor was called out. My mum's told this story to me several times, but it was a bank holiday, so the doctor was sort of less than keen to come out,
Mhm.
but did so thankfully, and then said, they didn't know what was wrong, because you can't really diagnose Hirschsprung's sort of without being in a hospital. So I was taken to or blue lighted actually to a hospital, and then I was diagnosed. At another hospital, so I was taken to a local hospital, then taken to a larger regional hospital, and then diagnosed with Hirschsprung's disease there. Um, and for Hirschsprung's disease, you said you'd never met anyone with Hirschsprung's. So there are two main types. So you can have sort of long segment where the whole bowel is affected, so the ganglion cells aren't working. So the ganglion cells that sort of pushes everything along aren't working. Or you can have what I have, which is short segment, where only part of it isn't working, and you sort of cut the bit out that doesn't work, and then you pop it back together. And it's a very, very simplistic way of putting it. I know it's a lot more complicated than that, um, but you put the two bits back together, and we'll cut out the bit that doesn't work. Um, so on that as well, I had my first stoma, so my first colostomy. That was then removed a few weeks after. Um, and then and I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but I was um, 9. I then had my second stoma, and then that was removed when I was 25. So I have had a couple of stomas in my life.
Mhm.
Um, so that's why I do tend to interview with people with stomas as well as people without, because I've sort of seen it from both sides, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, so to go back to me when I was very, very young, my condition of Hirschsprung's also included two parts that were quite serious. So I had or developed sepsis, which obviously is very serious, and also tachycardia,
Mhm.
where for anyone who is unsure of tachycardia, where the heart beats at over 100 times per minute.
Mhm.
So that's obviously very dangerous. There's a real risk of going into cardiac arrest if that's not treated. Thankfully, and the really good news comes in where I had a junior doctor that was doing some studying as junior doctors do, and one of the things that this junior doctor had studied was about tachycardia and how if you give a shot of magnesium to the patient, it can then slow the heart rate down.
Mhm.
Now we're going back to, well, 1992 at this stage. So I mean, this is well known now,
Yeah.
but 30 odd years ago, it wasn't well known at all. So it was very, very new information. And thankfully, this was administered to me. It slowed the heart rate down, and I was able to survive from there.
Wow. That is incredible, and thank the Lord for a switched on doctor who was doing research at the time and just knew what exactly this newborn baby needed. So you were very, very young when your first stoma happened. You were oblivious to that, and I'm assuming from reading your notes. So Hirschsprung's disease is where there's a lack of the nerve cells in the bowel. So there's no peristalsis. Poo cannot pass along. It can't pass along, and can become obstructed and get blocked. And that was effectively what was happening to you. The tiredness, the fatigue in this newborn baby because the bowel wasn't able to function. But it was only in the short segment. So what they did then was cut a section of your bowel away and pieced it back together, which is
Yeah,
amazing. So,
effectively, yeah. I know it sounds quite simple, but yeah, effectively.
but it's major, major, major surgery for anyone of any age, let alone a newborn baby going through this. I mean, your parents, this newborn baby had come into the world, and here they were. You were having major bowel surgery. So tiny, so small. That is bound to have been very traumatic indeed for your parents as well. But you successfully came through that surgery. And do you remember then, you said your second surgery came around the age of 9. What do you have memories of what your bowel was like? Why did you think you had to have surgery? Were you aware of what was happening?
So sorry, just to correct myself on that. The second, I had about 5 surgeries before the age of 3. So I think the second stoma was the 8th surgery. So so that'd have been about 9 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So that would have been. I remember it a little bit. I remember having the stoma.
Hmm.
Um, Not too much in terms of because I had a bag with it, and then I've mentioned this in terms of stomas to a lot of people, and nobody seems to have come across it before. But I had what's called a tegaderm. I don't know if you've heard of a
Not heard
tegaderm at
that
all.
term. No.
So the best way I had it described to me is when you have a tattoo, sometimes they put what looks like cling film over the top
Hmm.
and sort of that kind of thing to protect the tattoo. So this was effectively what a tegaderm is. So it's sort of it's a clear cling film like um, uh, sort of rectangular shape that has sort of sticky patches on the side, so it sticks like a plaster effectively, and that was stuck over the stoma.
Okay.
So I used those from 9 till about 23. 23, I think I was when I had that second stoma removed. Um, but yeah, so I still haven't heard anybody who knows what a tegaderm is yet.
And so how does that function? Because in my head, I'm thinking you take the plaster away and you maybe insert a catheter, similar to an ACE procedure. Because
Yes.
how how would you drain that, or how do you empty your bowel with that?
So that was an Ace Malone stoma. So you sort of take the tegaderm off, and then once a week I had washouts effectively. So you put the catheter in, and there was saline, and there were 2 other mixtures that went in, so just to help everything go through. And then that was once a week until I think I was about 15 when I stopped doing those. I was just told I didn't need them anymore. Um, and then had the stoma until I was 23, and then that was that was a choice that I made to remove the stoma. I did quite a bit of research beforehand. I didn't even know it was possible to just remove it or reverse it.
Mhm.
I'd never heard of anyone who'd had a reversal, so I just asked and I said, can I reverse this?" Because at that stage, all it was doing was just being a nuisance. It was just leaking. It was um, and you couldn't do things like wear white t-shirts, for example.
Mm.
So and with my job, I was very active, so it was constantly leaking, and it was just basically becoming a nuisance. So it wasn't necessarily removed for any medical reason. It was just more
And you
sort of looks and whatnot.
Yeah, so the Ace Malone procedure that we're kind of talking about, I know in a lot of children what they do is they use the appendix. The appendix is attached to the small bowel, so they bring it out through an opening in the skin. Effectively, it works the same way as a stoma, but then there will be a little covering. Sometimes there's a button that with a little balloon, catheter balloon goes in behind it to keep it closed. You use the Techiderm stuff. If I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
And yeah, it probably became a nuisance. I know over time for a lot of people that can stretch, it can leak. And when it touches the skin, it burns the skin. I know if you get a leak in your stoma, it's like acid and it burns the skin. Certainly with an ileostomy anyway. But that, so you were going into your teens. What was that like at school? Did you tell any friends? How did you manage? Because you're a sports person. How did that impact you, as a teenager?
I think it was just, and whether this was right or wrong, it was just a case of pretending it didn't exist. And I think apart from when I went into operations, and it's one of those things where I think, if you don't ask any questions, I won't tell you any lies type thing. I think, people didn't really ask, so I didn't say. There were obvious times when I had stomach illnesses or
Mhm.
stomach pain and things like that, but I tend to try and keep it hidden as much as possible. Again, rightly or wrongly. Things like being a sportsman, obviously, you change and whatnot, and so people have seen sort of scars and kids at that age. I do remember a couple of things where when they say, "Oh, were you eaten by a shark?" and things like that, and you think,
Mm,
I kind of understand why they said that at the time.
yeah.
But my friends would say, "Oh, that looks a bit strange," but didn't really comment or anything. I think I was quite fortunate because you can have people who can be quite cruel with things like that. So I think I was quite fortunate, especially being in a sporting environment constantly,
Mhm.
that it wasn't. I was still able to do everything that I wanted to do. I
Okay.
was still able to play cricket to a very high level. I was still able to play football to a very high level. Up until sort of about 18 or so, I played football and cricket up until I was about a couple of years ago. So it didn't really stop me doing anything, apart from obviously having a few operations here or there. But I think from the age of 9, I had the 8th operation. Then I was 12 when I had my ninth, and then 25 when I had my 10th and final operation. So in terms of actually missing things, apart from hospital visits, it wasn't. I'd say I was quite fortunate.
Great. Amazing. And so life on the other side of surgery and having done away with the stoma, how does Hirschsprung's disease impact your life? Do you live a normal life now? How's your daily bowel function? How have things been for you?
So with the intestine being shorter, obviously everything travels through quicker than it would do with other people because I'm missing X amount of centimeters. So there is that sort of, possibly needing to go more than other people. But in terms of living a normal, quote unquote, normal life, I do. I mean, there's, I'm still very active. I still do a lot of running, still do a lot of fitness because it's always been a large part of my life.
Mhm.
In terms of diet, things like that, don't really have to watch what I eat too much. Obviously, things like really spicy food and whatnot is not going to agree with me. But mostly, yeah, it's a normal life. There's I think one thing that has, I guess, helped me in life is having a lot of those surgeries younger because I do credit those for
Mm.
my pain tolerance levels. And I do have an extraordinarily high pain tolerance. So I guess things might affect me a little bit more if I didn't have that. And whether it's because nerves are missing slightly or I've just taken a lot of pain and I've just become used to it. I'm not sure, but I think, yeah, so having a greater pain tolerance has definitely helped.
Cool. Um, what Were there any other symptoms with Hirschsprung's disease, or is it all this issue in the boil?
It is bowel issue. Having done quite a bit of research into this and interviewed people, there is a 10% chance, or roughly 10% chance, should I say, of having Down syndrome that has been accredited um, with Hirschsprung's disease.
Mhm.
And I did interview somebody quite a few weeks ago who has a child with Hirschsprung's and Down syndrome. But in terms of actually medically diagnosed conditions that are associated with Hirschsprung's, there's not too many. In terms of chances of getting Hirschsprung's, obviously it's incredibly rare. 1 in 5,000, roughly, in the UK. 1 in 3,500 in the US. Um, and what it kind of comes down to is your parents need a certain set of chromosomes
Right. Okay.
in order to have a child that has Hirschsprung's. Obviously, my parents have these chromosomes. There is then, if your parents have these chromosomes, a 1 in 4 chance of having a child that has Hirschsprung's. Now, strangely enough, I have three brothers. So I was the one that was the 1 in 4 and ended up having Hirschsprung's. Whether it works like that, I don't know, but it is quite strange.
Bizarre. Yes. Well, and then do you know, is there a way where people can go and get tested if you know someone has Hirschsprung's? Can you go and get tested? Could your partner get tested? You know, are there ways of looking at that?
It's a good question. I'm not sure. I do know that there is a way. I did see somebody the other day and talk to somebody how you can have chromosome testing. I'm not going to say
Yeah.
how and why because I'm not 100% sure how you do it. But I know that you can be tested as to whether you have the chromosomes.
Mhm.
What you can then do about it, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
You can't have them removed, for example.
No.
So I think it's more a case of knowing the risks,
Mhm.
and then if you then, it's just sort of knowing. I think
Yeah.
um, in terms of that, once your child's been born, then yes, and if they suspect something, they'll diagnose Hirschsprung's disease. But it's usually, and again, not always the case, but usually is about 2 to 3 weeks after birth. So very similar to mine. So not necessarily on the day of birth or day after being diagnosed with Hirschsprung's. It's usually about 2 to 3 weeks after.
Wow. I know it has come up in a few conversations with people whenever I've been maybe asking another question for someone who has a small child or baby, or there's been a problem at birth, or, I've had a couple of people on here who have had young babies having stomas straight away, and it's been maybe a bowel resection, and Hirschsprung's has been brought up with a few people. Um, yeah, I just find it so interesting, and I guess it kind of works similar to cystic fibrosis in that parents can maybe get tested to see if they're both chromosome carriers. Um, and then, like you said, nothing really can be done. It's you make a decision on, do you want to go ahead and try to have children, or do you choose not to because you don't want someone to have that. But you are a perfect case of someone who has turned out incredible. having Hirschsprung's disease, and that, you can go through these surgeries. You've gone through 10 surgeries as a child, and you don't have a lot of trauma post surgery because you were so young. Well, you're shaking your head. You've been, you've got a high pain threshold. That's a win.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So life for you has been full of sports, cricket, football to professional levels and things. And what did you tell me? You worked at a sports development planner. You know, life's totally normal. You can crack on and do those things. Does your health have any impact on you at all, or everything's good?
Yeah, so I worked as a cricket coach for a decade. So I worked for Essex Cricket for a decade, ran teams and whatnot, and went all over the country with that. And then worked for Norwich City as a football coach. So ended up, so my life has been very much sort of dominated by sport, and then made the choice a couple of years ago now to start my own business and become a sort of sports development planner and work with. So that's all cricket, and then that's working with various countries all around the world to increase their cricket participation. So I work with Japan, I work with Sierra Leone, I work with Oman, I work with about 6 different countries all told. But thankfully, I can do that. I can do that from home. But yeah, I think I didn't notice so much when I was younger that my Hirschsprungs would affect my sporting side. But sometimes, obviously, you can get things like the stomach cramps and whatnot. And when you're on your feet all day and coaching and doing this, that, the other, um, and especially if you're the only one and you're in charge of a class of 30, you can't just sort of disappear and then come back again.
Mhm.
So again, it's that sort of high pain threshold and sort of having to tolerate the pain because you can't, because situation demands it. You can't sort of just nip away and then come back again. So yes, it has, I think, affected me a little bit. Um, but in terms of actually being able to do what I wanted to do and being able to get, be lucky enough to get as far as I did, that didn't really play into any issues. And then I think well, obviously when you do medical forms and things like that in professional sport, you then you have to declare sort of medical conditions and whatnot. And then every time I said the word Hirschsprung's disease, I would get an incredibly blank look, and I'd get, what's that? So I think I trivialized it a little bit in sort of, because I didn't want to go into the whole it's this, it's that, it's the other. I got it down to maybe a 2 sentence line and just said, yeah, this happens, and occasionally I might get some stomach pain. Right. Anyway, move on. It's, and I think it was a lot of not covering up as such, but more a case of I just didn't want to go into and explain it really.
But I think I get the vibe from you that you're someone who's very, very determined, and you're like, that's not going to hold me back. I'm
No,
going to continue on with this. Would you say, so in my head, Hirschsprung's disease is a chronic illness. It's always there. You're diagnosed with it. It's for your full life. Um, would you be impacted from like an autoimmune disease type thing? Would you consider yourself to be vulnerable if somebody came down with a bug or some type of virus? Would you feel susceptible? Would you catch that? Would you try to protect yourself, or do you just crack on with life?
no, no. I just crack on. I think definitely, obviously, when COVID hit, I didn't even think that I was susceptible or anything like that. I would just went to work as normal. So I worked in a school through COVID as a PE teacher. So I was a key worker as such. And it didn't cross my mind at all that I would be um,
Vulnerable?
susceptible to anything. So, I mean, that there were people that stayed away for various reasons, or they were pregnant, or what have you. Um, I don't think I even mentioned it. I think I just cracked on, and like you said, just get on with life, and yeah, I don't think I mentioned it at all.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So you do you work from home because you work for yourself, and then so in January of this year you decided to go ahead with your own podcast. So let's kind of talk a bit about that, because your handle is going to be shared in the show notes here. I'm quite keen to publicize your podcast, and maybe one day share my own story on there, and I'll waffle away back to you. But tell us a little bit about that. So it's Tom's Hirschsprung's podcast, which started in January of this year.
Yes, I have to say as well, it's very odd sitting this side of the camera. I'm usually the one asking the questions, not answering them. So it is forgive me if it's a little bit strange for me. But yes, so this was sort of brought out from my brother. So he runs a podcast all to do with type 1 diabetes. And I saw it, there's three of them that do that. And I saw it was going really well.
Mhm.
And they get sponsorship, they have a cycling team, and it's going really, really well. And I thought, well, I have an illness. I can do a podcast. Having absolutely no media training or knowledge or anything of how to do a podcast or even how a podcast works, but I thought I could do a podcast. Um, and so I just sort of set up Instagram, started searching for people who had Hirschsprungs. Originally thought uh, I didn't think I'd get anybody to come on the podcast, so I set myself a target of doing one interview every 2 weeks.
Mhm.
And I thought that's a realistic target, twice a month, 24 episodes. That sounds realistic and doable.
Mhm.
So I'm now 25 episodes in, having done one every single week. So that didn't quite go as planned. It went a lot more than that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I'm incredibly grateful to anybody who comes on the podcast because they do it out of their own free time. Um, I originally wanted to just go down the Hirschsprung's route,
Mhm.
but I think there are so many conditions that are similar to Hirschsprung's in terms of the symptoms you get,
Mhm.
that just having Hirschsprung's would have been cutting out so many people in IBD, UC, colitis community, and I just don't think that would have been fair. So it is mainly Hirschsprung's. So out of 26 episodes have been recorded. 25 are out there, and of the 26, 18 people are associated with Hirschsprung. So it is still very much
Mhm.
yeah, Hirschsprung's podcast, um, and it's what I wanted it to be. Um, but yeah, so I've just been very, very fortunate that I've had a lot of people who've replied to my messages, really, I guess, because I'm very much a nobody in this sense, and I just message people and I say, "Do you want to come on and talk?" And so many people have said yes, so I couldn't be more grateful to them.
That's absolutely amazing. I love that you're paying it forward, and I love that we can actually do this today, collaborate together, because I I feel like people outside of the bowel community, they just don't get it. They don't understand that we are such a tight community, and although we have so much crap going on in our lives and difficult times and trauma and all of that, we typically are more positive people. We're people who are a lot more resilient, that because we've had so much thrown at us, and we're about having each other's backs, supporting each other, and running alongside each other rather than tearing strips off each other and being in competition, which is why when you suggested we collab together, we share our stories on each other's podcast. Absolutely, I'm all over it, because that's me. That's just the heart that I have to get stories out there and pay it forward in the community and help other people. So thank you so much, Tom, for sharing your story with us today. I want to say at this point that if our audience, viewers or listeners or watchers, you know someone with Hirschsprung's disease, like, get them on to Tom's podcast. It's going to be linked below in the show notes. Tom's Hirschsprung's podcast. It's on Facebook. It's on Instagram. It's a bit of a mouthful for me to get out at times,
Me
and even
too.
when I'm spelling it, I'll have to double check it. But like, get people over there to it. What platforms is it on? Is it on Spotify, YouTube, Apple?
Yes, so it's on all major platforms, but Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spreaker. I think I put it on things like Castbox that I never knew existed, and so pretty much all major platforms you can find it. We're not on YouTube yet, I want to start doing that in the next few months when I feel confident enough to do video, which isn't yet. So hopefully, we'll have some YouTube clips. What I want to start doing some clips and some shorts and things like that on YouTube as well. But yes, to find the podcast, Instagram, Facebook, and all major podcast platforms.
Cool. Amazing. Well, Tom, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. It's been a different one and it's been an educational one. And I will say to our audience and viewers, if you have any questions, pop over to Tom's Instagram and ask him those questions because I ain't got those answers. Anything stoma related, I'll certainly try and help you out as best I can. But remember, I am only 5 months into my own journey. But we're totally here for the questions. If you've got any, certainly come over and ask us. Tom, if there was one last thing, one golden nugget that you wanted to leave with our viewers today, what would it be?
Question. Good question. I think what I'd have to say is it's kind of really what I'm about and what my podcast is about. And it's about achieving things in the face of adversity. And I think, yes, it's not to trivialize any issues or operations or what have you that go through, but there's so much that can be achieved, even though you've gone through all of these things, to not give up. Don't give up, and there's still so much that can be achieved.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Tom, thank you very much. And thank you for our audience and viewers tuning in and listening today. Um, oh, bear with me 1 second. Vanished off my screen there for a second, and these things happen because I'm not a social media techno. My class himself as a dinosaur. He just vanished. Yes, guys, I was saying thank you so much for turning up today. Do tune in next week when we will bring you another episode. But from me today and from Tom, it's over and out. Thanks very much, Tom.
Thank you.